Moscow, September 1978. At a language institute 2 blocks from Red Square, a British council teacher writes her name on a blackboard in chalk. Margaret Fletcher. She teaches English to the children of Soviet officials, diplomats, and future elites. Her lessons are ordinary. Grammar drills, homework essays, parent meetings. But inside one language lab recorder is a camera labeled Unit H-17, quietly logging faces, names, and handwriting samples. For 10 years, Soviet intelligence believed their children were safe inside classrooms. They were wrong. This is Operation Chalkline, how MI6 mapped the KGB by listening to homework. Margaret Fletcher was born in Bath, England, in 1946. Her mother was a Polish refugee who fled Eastern Europe after the war. Her father administered a regional school system. By age 27, Fletcher had developed a skill that made her operationally valuable. She could recognize patterns in how people talked around sensitive subjects. The formative event came in Helsinki, 1973. Fletcher was teaching English to diplomats. British embassy staff asked her to informally translate during social functions. She noticed discrepancies between official Soviet statements and private remarks. More importantly, she noticed how people revealed information they didn't intend to share. Not through what they said, but through what they avoided saying. Associates described her as unremarkable in appearance, never memorable in conversation. This was not a weakness. It was her operational advantage. MI6 identified Fletcher as uniquely suited for deep cover operations. The assessment was specific. She could live truthfully inside a lie for extended periods without behavioral drift. Most operatives excelled at short-term deception. Fletcher's capability was different. She could sustain a false life for years while maintaining the psychological discipline to extract intelligence without arousing suspicion. By 1977, as détente collapsed and the Cold War intensified, MI6 needed exactly this kind of asset. The requirement was urgent. Traditional espionage methods had failed inside Moscow. Surveillance was comprehensive. Diplomatic movements were tracked continuously. Recruiting KGB officers was nearly impossible. Dead drops were compromised. Electronic surveillance was detected. Every conventional approach ended in exposure or misinformation. MI6 needed intelligence from inside Soviet society, but not from defectors or satellites. They needed data on generational continuity. They needed to understand how the next generation of Soviet intelligence officers was being groomed and selected. The doctrine guiding this requirement was called second-order mapping. The logic was straightforward. If you cannot penetrate an intelligence service directly, map it through the families of its officers. Traditional targeting focused on recruiting adults who already held positions of power. Second-order mapping reversed this approach. It studied children to understand their parents. It analyzed family systems to reconstruct organizational hierarchies. The method was slower but more sustainable. It exploited a vulnerability that even paranoid intelligence services struggled to protect. The assumption that children's education was neutral ground. MI6 called this the generational access strategy. The approach required sustained, legitimate proximity to targets over years. It demanded cover so authentic that even prolonged scrutiny would reveal nothing suspicious. It needed an operative who could function in isolation without resupply or regular contact. Fletcher matched every requirement. The obstacles were severe. Soviet counterintelligence was among the most sophisticated in the world. The KGB assumed all foreigners in Moscow were either intelligence operatives or recruitment targets. Surveillance teams followed diplomats, journalists, and teachers. Apartments were monitored. Phone lines were tapped. The Second Chief Directorate existed specifically to identify and neutralize foreign intelligence operations on Soviet soil. And any deviation from expected behavior triggered investigation. The ethical risk was equally serious. The operation would require proximity to minors. Intelligence gathered would come from children's schoolwork, parent-teacher interactions, and observations of family dynamics. This created moral lines that intelligence doctrine had not clearly defined. The children were not targets. They were not agents. They were data sources who would never know they had been used for intelligence purposes. Whether this constituted exploitation or simply observation remained unresolved within MI6 planning discussions. The technical challenge was data collection without resupply. Moscow was not Beirut or Vienna. Equipment could not be regularly replaced. Dead drops were compromised faster than they could be established. Any device brought into the Soviet Union would need to function for years without maintenance, avoid detection during routine security sweeps, and extract data through channels that appeared completely legitimate. Conventional surveillance technology was too fragile for this environment. Despite these challenges, planners identified an opening. In mid-1978, MI6 analyzed enrollment records at foreign language institutes across Moscow. The data revealed that over 40% of First Chief Directorate officers enrolled their children in British Council or similar Western language programs. The reason was institutional. Soviet intelligence services needed officers fluent in English for overseas postings. Private tutoring was viewed as ideologically suspect. State programs were considered inadequate. Western-run language institutes offered the best instruction while remaining technically under Soviet oversight. The classroom became the access point, not through recruitment, not through seduction or blackmail. Through the simple act of teaching English to children whose essays would reveal family patterns their parents worked to conceal. Within 6 months, all elements would be in position. But first, Margaret Fletcher needed to become someone she was not. During the operational planning phase in late 1977, Fletcher experienced what MI6 psychologists call pre-deployment identity fracture. The psychological assessment was specific. She would spend 10 years maintaining a cover identity so thoroughly authentic that discovery would be nearly impossible. This meant living alone in Moscow, teaching genuine classes, unforming real relationships with colleagues, and never breaking character. The isolation would be absolute. No emergency extraction existed. If compromised, she would face Soviet interrogation and imprisonment with no diplomatic immunity. The pre-deployment psychological evaluation contained one notation that later proved prophetic. Fletcher told her handler she worried less about being caught than about forgetting why she was there. The mission would consume a decade. The daily reality of teaching would be genuine. The students would be real children learning real English. At some point, the lie would feel more true than the mission. The handler noted this concern, but considered it manageable. The operation continued. The human element created operational tension from the beginning. Fletcher was not deceiving enemy combatants. She was teaching children. The intelligence value came from exploiting parental trust in educational institutions. KGB officers sent their children to her classroom, believing schools were ideologically safe spaces where children could learn without Western intelligence interference. This assumption was strategically sound under normal circumstances. What made Operation Chalkline viable was that it violated this assumption in a way Soviet security doctrine had not anticipated. By May 1978, the operation entered its execution phase. The trigger was specific. MI6 received confirmation that 3 senior KGB officers had enrolled children in the Moscow Language Institute No. 7 for the autumn term. The Institute had requested an additional British Council instructor. Fletcher's application was already in the system, authentic and unremarkable. The window was 90 days to complete final preparation and deploy. The infrastructure supporting Operation Chalkline was built on a principle called passive persistence. The logic was specific. In an environment where active surveillance equipment would be detected within weeks, intelligence gathering required devices that could survive routine security inspections by appearing exactly as they seemed. No transmissions, no unusual power consumption, no components that would reveal dual use under examination. The equipment needed to function for years, not months. The core collection system was the H-series modification. MI6 Technical Services modified 12 Tandberg reel-to-reel language lab tape recorders. The modification was elegant. A pinhole camera was embedded inside the tape transport mechanism, positioned to capture the student workstation through a ventilation grill that already existed in the original design. The camera used a mechanical film advance triggered by the tape motor. Every 90 seconds during playback or recording, the camera captured a single frame on specialized microfilm. The film cartridge held approximately 800 images. Storage capacity was 3 months of normal classroom use. The cameras were designated H-series because the housing modification was developed in Helsinki during a separate operation in 1976. Unit H-17 was the designation for Fletcher's primary classroom recorder. Units H-18 through H-28 were installed in other classrooms as backup systems and cross-reference tools. Each unit appeared identical to unmodified Tandberg machines. The only difference was weight. It increased by 200 grams due to the film cartridge assembly. Security inspections measured electrical signatures, not precise weights. The modification survived. The microfilm cartridges were replaced during legitimate British Council equipment maintenance visits. A technician from the British Embassy Cultural Affairs Office performed quarterly maintenance on language lab equipment under an existing service contract established in 1974. The contract predated Fletcher's arrival, eliminating suspicion of coordination. During maintenance, the technician replaced tape heads and cleaned transport mechanisms. Microfilm cartridges were extracted and replaced inside sealed film canisters labeled as cleaning supplies. The entire cartridge swap required 45 seconds per machine. 8 years of operation produced 0 detected anomalies during Soviet security sweeps. Communication protocols were designed around the assumption of total surveillance. Fletcher had no radio, no cipher pads, no dead drop locations inside Moscow. Intelligence reports were coded into quarterly student performance assessments submitted to British Council headquarters in London through standard administrative channels. The code was simple but effective. Specific phrases in educational evaluations corresponded to intelligence updates. Progress inconsistent meant transfer. Vocabulary expansion meant promotion. Behavioral regression meant operational stress detected in family unit. These phrases appeared natural in the context of teaching assessments. Soviet mail censors reviewed every document leaving Moscow, but found nothing suspicious in routine educational paperwork. The team structure was minimal by necessity. Fletcher operated alone in Moscow with no local support network. Her handler rotated every 18 months to prevent pattern detection. The first handler worked from Vienna, the second from Ottawa. The third returned to London. Each knew only their segment of the operation. Compartmentalization was absolute. If Fletcher was compromised, the entire network she could reveal consisted of one person she met once per year during scheduled home leave. Escape routes existed, but were never tested. If discovery occurred, Fletcher's instructions were to request immediate consular access and say nothing. No rescue operation was planned. No extraction team was positioned. The calculation was cold. If the operation was compromised, she would be arrested, tried, and imprisoned. MI6 would issue standard diplomatic protests. The intelligence value she had already provided would justify the sacrifice. These were the terms she accepted before deployment. The planning consumed 11 months. By August 1978, microfilm cartridges were loaded into modified Tandberg units. British Council paperwork confirmed Margaret Fletcher's posting to Moscow Language Institute No. 7. She had 48 hours before the autumn term began. September 1st, 1978. At 0900 hours, Fletcher entered her classroom for the first time. 24 students, ages 12 through 16, sat in rows. The children of diplomats, military officers, scientists, and KGB personnel mixed without visible hierarchy. Our Soviet ideology demanded this. The practice created Fletcher's operational advantage. She could not know which students had intelligence value until they revealed it through their work. First contact required absolute patience. Fletcher's instructions were explicit. Conduct normal classes for the entire first term without any intelligence collection. Establish credibility. Let students and parents grow comfortable. Soviet counterintelligence would be watching most carefully during the initial months. Any deviation from expected teacher behavior would trigger investigation. For 3 months, Fletcher taught English grammar, assigned homework, graded essays, and attended faculty meetings. Nothing more. The waiting period served a second purpose. It allowed Fletcher to establish baseline behavior patterns, how students interacted, how parents responded to teacher communications, what types of questions raised suspicion versus which appeared routine. By December 1978, Fletcher understood the boundaries of acceptable inquiry. She knew which families were reserved and which were open. She identified students whose essays revealed detail versus those who provided minimal information. The mapping of personalities provided the foundation for intelligence collection that would begin the following term. Over the next 4 months, Fletcher gradually introduced writing assignments designed to elicit family information. The assignments were pedagogically sound, preventing suspicion. Describe your family's summer holiday. What does your father do at work? Where has your family lived? These were standard language learning exercises focused on personal narrative and descriptive vocabulary. They were also devastatingly effective intelligence tools. The essays revealed patterns immediately. Students described long trips taken without explanation, new offices and buildings they could not name, special meetings their fathers attended that required sudden travel, parents who came home late speaking languages the children did not recognize. These details appeared innocuous in isolation. Cross-referenced across multiple students over multiple terms, they reconstructed KGB organizational movements. Complications emerged in March 1981. One student, designated Student Sigma 4 in Fletcher's coded reports, wrote an essay mentioning his father's transfer to a new department. The essay was submitted on March 12th. On March 28th, MI6 Signals Intelligence confirmed a major reorganization within the KGB First Chief Directorate. Student Sigma 4's essay had predicted the reorganization 16 days before Western intelligence detected it through conventional means. This meant the children's information was not just confirmatory, it was predictive. The discovery created immediate risk. If essays could predict KGB movements, they had strategic value that justified increased operational tempo. But increased collection meant increased risk of detection. Fletcher's handler authorized limited expansion. 2 additional writing assignments per term focused on family activities. Parent-teacher meetings extended from 10 minutes to 15 minutes to allow additional observation time. The camera units in the language lab captured student faces during every session. The operations value had shifted from mapping existing structures to anticipating future ones. Scrutiny increased in autumn 1981. A Soviet administrator conducted an unscheduled audit of language lab equipment, following a security briefing about Western surveillance operations in Eastern Europe. The administrator examined every Tonberg unit, testing electrical systems and inspecting internal components. The H-series cameras survived because they were mechanically passive during inspection. The administrator found nothing suspicious. The audit concluded with a notation that British Council equipment met Soviet safety standards. The operation continued. The execution window had opened, but slowly. Intelligence operations inside Moscow succeeded through patience, not aggression. Fletcher understood this. Every quarter, she submitted coded educational assessments through British Council administrative channels. Every quarter, microfilm cartridges were extracted and replaced during routine maintenance. The rhythm was sustainable precisely because it appeared routine. By January 1984, Fletcher's logs contained cross-reference data on 76 families. Each family file included student identification, handwriting samples from multiple assignments, facial photographs captured during language lab sessions, and timeline data showing when essays referenced significant family events. The data existed as scattered microfilm frames and coded assessment reports. Reassembled in London, it formed a comprehensive map of KGB First Chief Directorate personnel movements spanning 5 years. The breakthrough came in March 1983, as multiple students referenced sudden parental absences. Essays mentioned fathers traveling without notice. Family dinners canceled. Weekend plans changed abruptly. Fletcher noted the pattern in her March assessment. In London, analysts cross-referenced the dates with signals intelligence. The absences corresponded exactly to a period later identified as Ryan escalation, a Soviet intelligence operation to detect potential Western nuclear first strike preparations. KGB officers had been deployed on emergency alert. Their children's essays revealed the stress before Western intelligence understood its cause. The pattern analysis extended beyond personnel movements. Fletcher noticed grammatical mistakes appeared in student work during periods of family stress. A student who normally wrote complex sentences would suddenly produce simple, error-filled paragraphs. When cross-referenced with essay content mentioning parental absence or unusual family tension, these grammatical regressions became stress indicators. Promotions correlated with changes in writing tone. Students whose fathers received advancement wrote with more confidence. Those whose fathers faced professional difficulty showed linguistic retreat. Parent-teacher meetings provided critical supplementary intelligence. Fletcher attended 43 such meetings between 1978 and 1988. Soviet parents approached these meetings differently than Western parents. KGB officers attended in uniform if their assignment was official cover. Those under unofficial cover attended in civilian clothes, but often revealed military bearing through posture and speech patterns. Fletcher noted seating positions during meetings, and she observed which parents asked detailed questions about curriculum and which asked nothing. She identified which families showed concern about their children's English proficiency versus which viewed the classes as obligatory credentialing. One meeting in November 1984 lasted exactly 7 minutes. The father sat rigid, asked no questions, and departed without pleasantries. Fletcher noted the interaction in her coded assessment as extremely brief contact, negative affect. MI6 later matched the description to Colonel Yuri Andropov, a senior Second Chief Directorate counterintelligence officer known for paranoia about Western intelligence operations. The brevity of the meeting itself became intelligence data. An officer that concerned about foreign contact would not keep his child in a British taught program unless institutional pressure required it. This revealed internal KGB policy. Language training with Western instructors was mandatory for children of officers designated for future overseas postings, regardless of parental security concerns. The vulnerability being exploited was specifically human. Parents trusted schools as neutral institutional spaces. Soviet ideology reinforced this trust. Education served the state. Teachers were ideologically vetted. Students learned within frameworks designed to reinforce socialist values. The presence of Western instructors in language institutes created cognitive dissonance that Soviet security doctrine resolved by assuming ideological oversight was sufficient protection, and British council teachers were monitored for anti-Soviet statements or recruitment attempts, but not for passive intelligence gathering through routine educational activities. This assumption created the operational space Fletcher occupied. She made no recruitment attempts. She expressed no political opinions. She taught English grammar exactly as her training prescribed. Soviet monitors attending her classes found nothing suspicious because nothing suspicious occurred. The intelligence collection happened in the space between what appeared to be happening and what was actually happening. Students wrote essays. Teachers read them. This was education. That it was also intelligence mapping was invisible because the process itself was genuinely educational. Every quarter for 10 years, Fletcher summarized findings in coded assessments. British Council headquarters in London received these reports as routine administrative documentation. The reports were photographed and forwarded to MI6 via diplomatic pouch. In London, analysts extracted the intelligence content and cross-referenced it with signals intelligence, satellite reconnaissance, and human intelligence from other sources. The result was a comprehensive understanding of KGB personnel dynamics that no single intelligence source could have provided. By 1987, the operation had mapped 76 KGB families across 9 departments. The data included generational patterns showing how intelligence careers were inherited. Children of KGB officers attended specific schools, participated in particular youth organizations, and followed predictable career paths. These patterns allowed MI6 to identify likely future intelligence officers 10 years before they entered operational service. The strategic value extended beyond immediate intelligence to predictive forecasting. The final year of operation occurred during Glasnost, as Soviet society began opening to Western contact. Paradoxically, this created additional risk. Increased openness meant increased scrutiny of remaining restrictions. Foreign teachers who had operated quietly for years suddenly faced new administrative reviews as Soviet bureaucracy attempted to reconcile ideological controls with political liberalization. Fletcher's operational directive for 1988 was to maintain normal activity while preparing for exit. The extraction was designed to appear routine. In May 1988, Fletcher submitted a formal request to British Council headquarters citing health concerns. The documentation was genuine. She had developed hypertension and chronic insomnia, both documented by Soviet medical examinations. The health issues were real consequences of sustained operational stress, but appeared as ordinary medical problems. British Council approved her departure. Soviet authorities processed the exit visa without incident. August 15, 1988. At 14:30 hours, Margaret Fletcher boarded an Aeroflot flight from Moscow to London. She carried 2 suitcases containing personal belongings, teaching materials, and student farewell letters. No classified materials, no intelligence reports, nothing suspicious. The microfilm cartridges documenting 10 years of intelligence collection had already been extracted through diplomatic channels. The Tandberg recorders remained in the language lab, their cameras now inert and unimportant. The operation concluded without discovery. Soviet counterintelligence never identified Fletcher as an intelligence operative. The KGB never understood that their children's English homework had been mapping their organizational structure for a decade. The families never knew their trust in educational institutions had been used as an intelligence weapon. From an operational perspective, this was perfection. From an ethical perspective, the question remained unresolved. The operation was never discovered, but this did not mean it left no traces. By autumn 1988, several administrative anomalies existed in British Council records that could have triggered investigation if anyone had been looking. Equipment maintenance logs showed unusual consistency in technician assignments. Student performance assessments contained linguistic patterns that, if analyzed systematically, would have revealed coded communication. Fletcher's decade-long posting to a single location was unusual for British Council career progression. These anomalies existed in plain sight, but were never examined. The best intelligence operations succeed not by leaving no evidence, but by leaving evidence no one thinks to investigate. Soviet authorities approved Fletcher's departure, citing documented health issues. No exit interview was conducted. No security review was initiated. She was processed as a departing foreign instructor with completed contract obligations. The lack of scrutiny confirmed what Operation Chalkline had proven. Sustained authenticity defeats detection better than sophisticated deception. The strategic intelligence gains were substantial and specific. MI6 obtained longitudinal data on KGB leadership changes across 3 different general secretaries. They mapped stress cycles within Soviet intelligence during critical periods, including the 1983 Ryan Alert and the 1986 Chernobyl disaster response. They identified generational grooming patterns, showing how KGB families prepared children for intelligence careers. They documented internal hierarchy shifts that conventional intelligence collection had missed or detected months later. The operation did not stop the Cold War. It did not prevent any specific Soviet intelligence success. What it accomplished was reduction of uncertainty during the Cold War's most dangerous final decade. When Western intelligence analysts assessed Soviet intentions during nuclear standoffs, they had data on whether KGB leadership was stressed or confident, unified or fractured. This data came from children's essays describing whether their fathers came home for dinner or worked late. The mundane details of family life became strategic intelligence. The cost was measured in ways beyond operational budget. Fletcher spent 10 years in sustained isolation, maintaining perfect cover discipline while teaching genuine classes to real children. The psychological toll was documented in her post-operation debriefing. She described moments when the false identity felt more real than her actual self. She reported difficulty reconnecting with family members who had aged 10 years while she existed in frozen cover. She experienced what MI6 psychologists call identity dissolution, the gradual erosion of authentic self under prolonged deep cover. The operation succeeded. The operative survived. But what returned to London in August 1988 was not entirely who had departed in August 1978. The legacy of Operation Chalkline extended beyond its specific intelligence product. It reshaped how Western intelligence services understood family systems as a strategic terrain. Education, healthcare, and childcare institutions were reclassified from neutral spaces to potential intelligence environments. The operation proved that sustained, passive collection over years could produce intelligence that active operations could not obtain. This doctrine influenced later operations in multiple theaters. The ethical questions remained deliberately unresolved. MI6 internal reviews of the operation acknowledged moral ambiguity, but reached no definitive conclusions. The children were not harmed in any conventional sense. No lies were told in the classroom. No recruitment attempts occurred. The education provided was genuine and valuable. Yet innocence was used as a surveillance tool without consent. Trust in educational institutions was exploited without disclosure. Parents who believed they were protecting their children by sending them to ideologically monitored programs were correct about the monitoring, but wrong about who was doing it. Was this brilliance or betrayal of something sacred? The answer depends on which framework you use to evaluate intelligence operations. From a pure operational perspective, Chalk Line was exemplary tradecraft. Deep cover sustained for a decade. Intelligence collection without detection. Strategic value confirmed by cross-reference with other sources. Zero casualties. Clean extraction. By every metric intelligence services used to measure success, the operation was flawless. From an ethical framework that values transparency and consent, the operation violated principles even intelligence professionals struggle to defend. Children's schoolwork became intelligence data. Parent-teacher conferences became surveillance opportunities. The trust parents placed in schools as safe spaces for their children's development was exploited systematically. That no child was physically harmed does not resolve the question of whether their innocence was misused. The paradox remains. If intelligence is gathered without coercion but without awareness, is it ethical observation or exploitation? The operation extracted information that subjects did not know they were providing. No force was used. No deception occurred in the classroom itself. Yet the entire context was deceptive. Fletcher was genuinely teaching English, but she was not merely a teacher. The students were genuinely learning, but they were simultaneously intelligence sources. The duality cannot be resolved by claiming no harm was done, because harm is not the only measure of ethical violation. What's your perspective on this? Does the strategic value of mapping hostile intelligence services justify using children's education as an intelligence weapon? Or does the exploitation of parental trust and institutional neutrality cross a line that intelligence operations should not cross, regardless of effectiveness? The question reveals as much about your worldview as it does about Operation Chalk Line. If this story made you reconsider what intelligence work actually requires, not just in terms of tradecraft, but in terms of moral compromise, then you've understood what makes operations like Chalk Line both brilliant and deeply uncomfortable. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories about the intelligence operations that redefined how espionage works, hit that subscribe button. These are the operations that changed everything, for better and worse.